All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Bishop's interview. Once again, I am Nathan Hinckley, and very excited about tonight. We've got some people joining already, and I want to say welcome. What's up, Coach? Hello, Mark. Hello, some guy out there, Corey Hoare. We've got the chat popping off. No, Coach, that is my theme music right there. I just let it go a little longer this time, so. All right, so want to welcome everyone, and I'm super excited about our guest tonight. Without further ado, let me welcome his randoness. Kolby, what's up, my man?
Hi, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
Man, you don't know how happy I am to meet you. We kept our pleasantries to a minimum a second ago because I just wanted it to be real and authentic. That's what my channel's all about. How you doing, Kolby?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So are you in Idaho still?
Yeah, I'm in Boise. Yep.
Okay. Well, I've only been there once to a nice cabin in the mountains there, but is it snowy there right now?
No, it's like 50 degrees here.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Uh,
we had snow. We had snow over Christmas, so that was nice.
okay.
But Christmas being in the middle of the week was really weird.
Oh yeah, it was. So we just got the call. My viewers are sick of hearing this, but my kids haven't been to school since Christmas break
Oh wow.
over weather, and there's literally no snow. But I don't know if you know how it is in the South, but we just cannot handle snowy roads or iced over roads. So yeah, they just got the call, and every time it's like at 4 o'clock, they'll call and say, "Oh, no school the next day," and the whole house, erupts into a big party. So, um, Kolby, we got a lot of people in the chat. Everybody's saying hey and hello, and Kolby's back. So I think everyone's happy to see you, but nobody more than me. So, hey, look at this. We already got Mark putting up money on this night. So.
Thanks, Mark. That's so nice.
Appreciate that, Mark. He says, great guest, Nathan. I saw Kolby and his wife on Mormon Stories. Much love and respect to them. Absolutely. We're going to get into all of that. So, so let me add this to the screen. I had asked Kolby, I said, are you okay with me using this picture of your wife? And what'd you say, Kolby?
I said she's not ashamed to be seen with me anymore. Um, I'll tell you a fun story about that. So here's the story of how my wife and I met.
Okay.
We served in the same mission, and that's how we met. We became friends. I actually went on a mission a little bit later. I was 21 by the time I left, and at the time the age change hadn't happened yet. I was teaching at the MTC when that age change happened, so I was a little bit older and didn't have a whole lot of friends when I came back and went to BYU. And she and I came home the same transfer. We joke about it sometimes because, truthfully, when we were in the mission field, she kind of drove me crazy a little bit. She was so she came from like just a very fundamentalist, literalist version of Mormonism, and I was always much more a spirit of the law type of guy, really focused on Christ. I was always way more attached to the New Testament than I ever was to the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
But yeah, that's how we met. And the first time, kind of my inside joke in telling you that was the first time we ever actually touched was a P Day basketball game where we ran into each other about 18 months into my mission. And it was the first time a girl had touched me in 18 months. And I was all sweaty and gross. And she said, disgusting, the first time she ever like full body contact touched me because we
No.
ran into each other.
I love it. Yeah, that is interesting. I'll tell you one on me and my wife. So we've been dating since I was several months shy of my 16th birthday. And we were at a church dance. We probably had seen each other before at some, we used to have a lot of activities and
Hmm.
church ball and different things. But anyways, her mother was there, and she paid my wife $5 to ask me to dance. So I've always been joking that now that I'm on this side of things, I would say her mom is probably wanting that money back. She figures she figures she got took on that.
Yeah, probably.
I want to mention that we just got this to match Mark from. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but anyways,
Harambe boy.
there we
Harambe
go.
boy.
There we go. So appreciate that, you guys. All right. So, yeah, first touch post mish was something. Yeah, that's right, Coach. All right. So I've got lots of things to ask you. Before I start, let me just share this screen right here. This is kind of my mantra here lately, to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. So your randomness, that's you today, my brother.
Okay. I don't advertise myself as being all that smart, but I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I've noticed that you've been a busy guy. So I've seen you on Mormon stories lately. I've seen you on Mormonish, and I've seen you palling around with the RFM. But now you're at the pinnacle of the ex-Mormon space.
That's right.
And of course, we all know what that is. What? How did that friggin' slide get in there? Hold on. Hold on.
Coach has
Oh,
got some explaining to do.
there, I think. See, I gave him permission to get in my slides, and he's got in here and jacked everything up.
I'm surprised
So,
you didn't pop up in your underwear.
oh, you heard about that too?
Oh, I watched it. I was dying.
Okay. Hey, I got to get viewers somehow, Kolby. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, let me go back to the RFM thing. So, first of all, what's your take on RFM?
I love RFM. We
I
talk,
did,
we're good friends. I talked to him, I don't know, for like an hour yesterday. We've been doing, for people who don't know, on RFM's solo podcast, we've been doing a series of responses to an apologetic work called The Light and Truth Letter. We've jokingly referred to it, RFM more than me, I'll point out. RFM is shorthand for Radio Free Mormon, Janine, in the comments that's asking about it. So Radio Free Mormon has his own podcast. Actually, right after I was on Mormon Stories with John back in 2022, the first ex-Mormon thing I ever did, which I was a month into having just gone to church at that point,
yeah.
which is kind of astounding to me. A tip to the people who are like in your faith deconstruction space: maybe don't go on to the biggest ex-Mormon podcast in the world like a month into your space. You won't be ready for all the stuff that happens. But yeah, RFM and I have been responding to the Light and Truth Letter, or as he jokingly calls it, the Light on Truth Letter. And we're actually recording an episode on Saturday that's kind of inspired by it. And we're going to cover some parts of the Light and Truth Letter called How Apologists Lie to You. So we've done a series of responses to Austin Fife's Light on Truth Letter, or Light and Truth Letter, whatever you want to call it, and have just had a lot of fun. We also did a series on what the legal field and what the rules of evidence can teach you about evaluating Mormon history. That was back in 2022, the first time I worked with RFM. And that episode, the first of those episodes, won a Brody Award that year for the best single podcast. So who
Wow.
knew back then that then we'd do this series on the Light and Truth Letter together?
Awesome. Thanks for giving us that rundown. I was going to ask you about that, but you covered quite a bit. Will you tell us? I know that you've got multiple podcasts and multiple hours of this Light on Truth, or whatever, Light and Truth. But what would be your two or three sentences on what is your take on that? For those people that don't know, it is basically in my understanding, an apologetic response to the CES letter. Is that right?
Yeah, I would call it like a reverse CES letter. So it purports to be written to the critics of the church by someone who claims they went through a faith crisis, this guy named Austin Fife, and that then, he was left with these unresolved questions. The letter is essentially these unresolved questions. My Sorry, lawyers are very verbose. I'm so sorry that I'm going over two sentences, but my overall takeaway on it. So we've done. I think we did 5 episodes so far. The longest of them is 4.5 hours. So we are really putting forth a good faith effort to read his arguments and get to the bottom of whether the evidence he claims that supports the church. He claims that by preponderance of the evidence, the church is true or is what it purports to be. And as we've looked into each and every one of his claims, I'll just give you an example because I think this really highlights the big problems I see. In the last episode, or actually it was the next to last episode, we talked about archaeological evidence that he purports claims supports the Book of Mormon. One of those claims is Nahum. So a lot of people have probably heard apologetics about Nahum and how it's such an impressive hit. We go through and in great detail explain how Austin makes claims that are disproven by the sources he himself cited. Austin then, in the episode after that, I had a discussion with Austin in comment section where Austin confirms he didn't even read those sources, that he just wrote what he thought had happened, what he'd heard over time, or people can look at that episode. It's called Can I Get a Witness on Radio Free Mormon, where we talk about that. But yeah, it's a really bad work. It's a really bad apologetic work. And the reason that that's a problem from my perspective is because bad apologetics that essentially misrepresent the evidence keep people in the church for a period of time. But when people figure out the truth, if they do figure out the truth, then they're really pissed and frustrated that they've been misled into believing the church is something it isn't. And the reason that's so important to me is because there were many areas where apologetics had hit me and misrepresented the evidence to me. So, for example, the Book of Abraham, we had a pamphlet in our mission that was spread around called the Resolving Concerns Packet, like handed out by our mission president, that supposedly told you how to deal with tough issues. And that pamphlet on Book of Abraham specifically said that 27 out of the 30 translation projects that Joseph did on the facsimiles were accurate and agreed with what modern Egyptologists say. That was a lie. That is an absolute lie, and the Gospel Topics essays today would bear that out. And so that's one of the reasons that I think the Light and Truth letter is such a problem, is that it's giving people really bad reasons to believe because it's not honestly dealing with the evidence. The reason that RFM and I decided to focus on the Light and Truth letter is because RFM did an episode by himself pointing out how when you go to the Light and Truth letter section on church finances, it doesn't deal with the 2023 SEC order at all. It just omits it entirely. It's in one section of the Light and Truth letter, but there's no substantive discussion. It's just used like as an example in one of the first chapters dealing with manipulation and logical fallacies. So that's my objective in doing this series with RFM. Is the way I look at this is if the church is what it purported to be, people know all of the, I guess I'll say it this way. If people decide to associate with the church after they understand what it is and they understand the evidence, they have all my support in the world. But there are tons of people who, like me, were misled about what the Light and Truth letter is, or about what the church is, by apologetics like the Light and Truth letter. And I think that is unethical, and I think it is wrong. And so I've never once lied to make the church look worse than it is, and I expect the same thing of apologists.
Great explanation. So you reminded me of, so I watched that episode. I think it was the one you were just referring to with RFM recently. And I laughed at the start because you guys were exchanging some pleasantries, and RFM says, "We're going to have to stop with this because we're on a time crunch." And then you said, "Well, RFM, I don't think 2.5 hours should necessarily be that big of a time crunch." But
yeah. My if I can pitch just my favorite part of that series so far, not that it hasn't been full of great insights from RFM. My personal favorite part, because it was the first time I've sat down and put pen to paper to sketch this out, is in the 3rd episode of that series, which deals with linguistic evidence for the Book of Mormon. I actually sketch out my own affirmative case for why I believe the Book of Mormon cannot possibly be historical. If I can give just a brief snapshot of that, it's because the Book of Mormon makes certain claims about the way Hebrew and Egyptian work relative to each other, the way that those languages have information density, basically, like the amount of information that can be conveyed by each character. And those claims that the Book of Mormon makes have to be literally absolutely true, or the book itself cannot exist. And the reason for that, I know it's kind of a silly reference, but is think about it like Back to the Future, right? If something that is the cause of something doesn't happen, if the cause doesn't happen, then the effect can't happen. And so, because the Book of Mormon makes claims about the way it was written, if those claims are not true, then the Book of Mormon cannot be what it purports to be. And the Book of Mormon claims that Egyptian would save space relative to Hebrew. This is in Mormon 9, and people can check out that episode. I walked through it in about an hour and a half in great detail. But at a high level, that's not the way that Egyptian or Hebrew work. And so those claims are wrong. And you can see this for yourself. The other very interesting thing about this is if people then do the research and look at Joseph Smith's work on Egyptian later in his life after the Book of Mormon, when he's dealing with the Book of Abraham manuscripts and the Kirtland Egyptian materials, this same misunderstanding of how Egyptian worked, which is that one single Egyptian character can give you like a paragraph of text, is the exact same misunderstanding of Egyptian that Joseph Smith had. So the author, what I'm saying is the author of Mormon 9 has a misunderstanding about how Egyptian works that Joseph Smith has, and we know that later because part of the Book of Abraham manuscript materials are written in Joseph Smith's handwriting.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna share this slide one more time because I just want to be in that brain. I just want to be in that brain, man. So I'm gonna say this. I would hate to debate you, Kolby. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And I know
you and someone else I can think of.
I'm not here to blow smoke, But since we're talking about that, for those before we move on, Janine wants to know how to find the Light and Truth letter. If we Google Light and Truth, will it come up? Is that the easiest way? Or
I think Austin created a website where you can read it for free, and I think it's a .org. So I think lightandtruthletter.org will get you there. And unlike apologists, I would encourage everyone to go read it because it's really bad, and the logic in it is extremely flawed. And so people can read it for themselves and make up their own mind. But like the errors are very obvious. And where RFM and I are putting our focus is actually looking at the sources and looking at what other sources have to say about the claims in the Light and Truth letter. But many of the issues are apparent right from a first read. That was actually my first experience with the Light and Truth letter. Is it started getting shared when it was published back in August of last year. And it was shared on a Reddit that I frequent, the Mormon subreddit, which discusses Mormonism between both believers and non-believers. It's full of more non-believers than believers, but it discusses Mormonism kind of as a general topic. And there's a lot of great resources there if people want to go to that subreddit. I like it a lot more than the ex-Mormon subreddit, even though that's a very useful venting place. It's got a lot of angsty teen energy for my taste. And so when it started getting shared on Reddit, I read the first chapter of the Light and Truth letter, and I honestly thought it was a joke how bad it was. Like I have a Reddit post talking about, is this like satire? Like, is this a clever ex-Mormon just talking about how bad Mormon apologetics are?
Wow. Okay. So let me see if I understand the Rando stuff here. All right, because it's been popping off here lately. So first of all, a word on RFM. I had brought up, what do you think about him?
Yeah.
I love that dude, man. I did a show with him and Bill, and they were so kind to bring me on. And up until the day of, I think, or maybe I think it was the day of, we had a three-way chat going on, and RFM hadn't contributed much, so I was a little nervous. Bill was talking, I was talking, I was like, RFM hasn't. Anyways, the day of, he calls me. My daughter's sitting there, she starts freaking out, and he was the most just nicest, just down to earth. I was like, it was like, it sounds like you're walking here. So he's like, yep, I'm walking around the track, and we chatted for 25 minutes or something. Just a great guy. I'm glad to hear that you feel the same way. So my understanding about the Rando stuff is this. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Perfect.
So Jacob Hansen is sort of a clout shark type guy. He
Sort
likes.
of.
He wants to be on with Joe Rogan and whoever he can get on with, and so he wanted to either get on Mormon Stories or he wanted to debate RFM or Bill or someone that's a big name. And I believe that you had said, "Hey, I'll debate you."
So let me stop you
Go
there.
ahead.
So what happened was RFM and Bill were asked on Mormonism After Dark by Kolch if they would answer Jacob's debate challenge. And RFM, probably not safe for your stream, had choice words for Jacob Hansen that people can check out. Okay.
Okay.
And because Jacob wanted to debate Book of Mormon topics specifically, and he wanted to do it on their platform, and they weren't interested, RFM texted me and asked me, "Hey, would you be interested?" Because RFM knows that I did debate in high school. He knows that I'm an attorney. He knows that I've regularly, over the last year, argued in front of the Idaho Supreme Court. He knows that I'm not afraid of arguing with somebody. He says, "Hey, would you be willing on Mormonism Live if we hosted you?" Because I don't have my own podcast by choice, Jacob. He says, "Hey, if would you be willing to debate Jacob Hansen on the question of Book of Mormon historicity?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I will offer Jacob this debate. The Book of Mormon is not historical. That's me taking the affirmative position." And I was going to offer basically a snapshot of that argument that we talked about from the linguistic episode that we did. That's something I've been mulling over for like a year. And so I offered that to Jacob because I know that Jacob's allergic to burdens of proof. So I said I would take the burden of proof and say that I can make a case that the Book of Mormon cannot be historical. And that would be one piece of evidence that I'd offer. There's others that I could cover too. Jacob said he didn't know who I was, and said that I was a rando on the internet. The thing that's funny about that, backstory wise, is that I had done a debate review of a debate that Jacob Hansen had done with Jacob Isbell on basically this whole idea of polygamy deniers. Was Joseph Smith a polygamist or not? And Jacob was in the live chat of that episode commenting on it. Okay. So the idea that he doesn't know who I am, maybe, I don't really care. I don't think of myself as all that important. The thing that was very funny is that I go on a live that Jacob had when he declined that invitation to say, "You were offered a debate on this platform that you asked about," because he asked about Mormon Discussion's platform and they were willing to allow us to do it there. And he didn't want to do it. And it was even on the topic that he wanted. And I even offered to assume the burden of proof. So the thing that's really funny about it is that's where the rando joke comes from, and why I'm calling myself his randoness now, because one of Jacob's little YouTube simps that loves it's a grown adult who loves Paw Patrol, so he's got a lot in common with my 6-year-old. He talked about how Jacob calling me rando must have really bruised my ego, and honestly, I just think it's really hilarious because in the same week that Jacob called me a rando, I was on Mormon Stories with John, and those episodes had like almost 200,000 views talking about the tithing lawsuits. I had a call with Doug Fabrizio on Radio West. I argued a case to the Idaho Supreme Court. Like, Jacob Hansen is the least of my concerns, and I think it's hilarious that he thinks that I care at all about his opinion.
So will the debate happen then, or is it not probably going to happen?
I mean, I'm still willing to engage with Jacob on the topic of Book of Mormon historicity.
Yeah.
For a while there,
he wanted to change it, didn't he? Or
yeah, well, he agreed to do it on a Cultural Hall Live, and then tried to change the topic to "Do trans people exist?"
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what the world needs, is two straight white dudes arguing about LGBT issues. So it's not like I'm afraid to debate that topic with him, but like, it doesn't have anything to do with Mormonism. So in my view, Jacob's just a coward that's afraid to defend the Book of Mormon he claims to believe in.
I got it. All right. Well, most of my viewers know that I am sort of new to this whole space of being on this side of things, Kolby. So I sent my family, my sister and brothers, a text on April Fool's Day, not last year, but the previous year, and basically broke the news that, I don't believe anymore. So, I mean, this is, all of this is new, but I feel like I'm playing catch up on quite a few things. And I think that might be one of the reasons why a lot of people seem to like my channel. It's almost like they're watching me deconstruct things in real time, and that's really honestly kind of how it is. So, anyways, thanks again for being on here. So,
Oh, of course.
bring me up to speed with the rando and everything. So last night, Coach had a great episode with Dr. Julie Hanks.
Hmm.
I thought it was great, and I noticed you in the chat there as
Hmm.
well. I tried to remember an exact quote from you last night. It was something like this: whenever someone is trashing Dr. Julie Hanks, I'll be there to call them out. Did I get that right?
Technically, I said I will be there to call them stupid.
Okay.
But yeah, that's pretty close.
Yeah. So once again, great job, Coach. And I was sitting there listening to that or watching it with my wife, and she was just like, "Man, she is so good. She's hitting all the points," and it was great.
Well, the thing that's so hilarious to me about folks like Jacob or Ward Radio who don't like Dr. Julie Hanks is like Dr. Julie Hanks' message is just like I was at Thrive where Dr. Julie Hanks presented to a bunch of ex-Mormons. Here's how you bridge build with your Mormon family. Okay, so for people who are wondering, like when Word Radio and Jacob accuse her of working with ex-Mormons or going to ex-Mormon General Conference, that was her topic. Okay, and Dr. Julie Hanks' overall message, as far as I've ever heard, is that people should live the life that they want to lead.
Mm-hmm.
That they should decide if leaving the church is right for them. She's there to help them walk through that and make healthy choices while they do that. If staying in the church is what they think is the right decision for them, she also is there to provide resources and support for that because she's Dr. Julie Hanks. She has a PhD and is a professional counselor and runs a practice. Like she has professional standards, just like attorneys have professional standards. I guess it's very sad to me that message of you should live the life that you want to lead, which my Mormon experience always taught me that's basically what agency is so threatening to folks like Jacob or Ward Radio. Like to me, that just seems like yeah, if you want to lead a certain type of life and you've made that decision, why in the world would you not be supported and feel resources for it? Get
Yeah.
resources for it. That just seems such a weird strain of authoritarianism. I just don't understand.
Yes. So my sister left the church when I was bishop. I was bishop
Mm,
from 2012 or 13 till 17, and one of the things that she didn't really have anyone as far as the family to kind of confide in because we all sort of turned on her.
yeah.
Me more than the rest of the family. But anyway, she found a lot of comfort and solace and support with Julie Hanks, and she kind of
Hmm.
turned me onto her. So I do have a lot of appreciation and just love for what she does. So
Hmm. Yeah, and if I can for 1 second say,
yeah.
because I'm an attorney, right? So I like to think about what the other side would say when I say something, and I can already see folks who listen to Jacob saying something like, "No, the point of the gospel is to live the way Christ wants you to live." Nothing I said and nothing Julie Hanks says is inconsistent with that. If that's what people want for their life, then that's the life that they should live, and they should have support and resources for that life. But not everybody chooses that life because not everybody believes that. And that's the thing that they don't seem to understand. It's like they're incapable of understanding that people have different opinions than them.
Right. All right. So Kolby, I have a good friend. He might even be watching tonight, but he's an attorney. He's faithful. He's on the faithful side, and he's actually CEO of one of the divisions of the church's branches, if you will. Really smart guy, but sometimes we've kind of butted heads because maybe he doesn't like the way that I refer to certain things, especially when it comes to lawsuits and money and just more lawyer things. So I've got you on here. I thought, basically, let me see if I understand. There's two big lawsuits going on right now, right? With the church and tithing
There's
and
actually
things like that. Is
there's
there more?
technically three actually. Yeah. So
Okay.
there's actually one that's in federal district court, but there are two that have been heard by one heard by the Ninth Circuit and one heard by the 10th Circuit.
Okay. My understanding is one of them has to do with people saying that they wouldn't have given tithing if the truth claims of the church would have been out in the open beforehand. Something to that effect. Is that fair
That's correct.
assessment?
Yeah, so that's correct. That's the Gaddy case, and that's the one that was heard in, oh my goodness, I should have looked this up ahead of time.
No worries. I'm springing that on you, but while you're looking that up,
so that's,
go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It only took me a second.
Yeah.
So that is a case that was heard at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and I actually covered that episode after the oral arguments were heard that same day. John DeLynn and I and Gerardo did an episode about the oral arguments and kind of break it down for people in more detail if they wanted to listen.
Yes, and that was the first time I think that I was familiar with you. So that was a great episode. Now the other one is a little bit different. I'm trying to remember.
Right.
It has to do with that under false pretenses,
Yep.
or is that this? Can you kind of sum up the other one for me and see if I can?
Yeah, so that's the case brought by James Huntsman. So that's in the Ninth Circuit. So you have a case that starts in federal court at the district court level. That's the trial court level. Typically, there's also magistrate courts, but we won't talk about that. Then when a decision is made that ends a case, one way or the other, that decision can be appealed, right? And so what happened in the Huntsman case was the federal district court, the trial court, dismissed Huntsman's case, basically saying that there was no actionable claim on his argument, which his argument is, as you kind of just stated, he's really focused on the statements that Gordon Hinckley and other church leaders made about the way the church was going to use tithing funds relative to City Creek and also Beneficial Life. Those claims were dismissed and upheld. So we won't talk about that anymore. But that's really what it boils down to is there's this one particular statement that President Hinckley made in general conference about the way the church was going to use tithing funds relative to City Creek that he alleges amounts to basically fraud or misrepresentation. Fraud and the inducement. The idea of fraud and the inducement is you told me something to make me give you something that I wouldn't have given you if I understood that that statement was false. That's at a layperson's level what the case is about. The procedural history is actually incredibly interesting to lawyer types, and I'll be really brief here, but the case was dismissed by the trial court. The case was then reinstated by an appellate panel of circuit court judges. So when you appeal, you get a panel of 3 appellate court judges from the entire panel that hear the case. They decided, no, there is actionable fraud here. 2 out of the 3 judges decided that. The church then petitioned for what's known as an en banc rehearing, which means that it's going to be reheard by a bigger group of judges. And that was the oral argument that was heard the Wednesday after the Monday that the Gaddy case was heard in the 10th Circuit. And we actually listened to that on Mormon Stories live with live commentary and a breakdown of before and after, kind of like what happened.
Okay. Do you want to break down the other one that you mentioned? You said there was 3. I'm not sure that I'm familiar with the other main case.
So the other one is a piece of multi-district litigation, which basically means that there were cases being brought using the same theory really as the Huntsman lawsuit and some of the Gaddy lawsuit stuff as well. The Gaddy lawsuit, as opposed to being hyper-focused on like these statements about the use of City Creek, or tithing funds relative to City Creek, is really focused more on the church's change in position on certain historical questions. So that one, I think, has a lot more trouble from First Amendment perspective of running into First Amendment trouble. And we'll see, the decision hasn't been rendered yet. But the new case is in the District of Utah. So it's also in the 10th Circuit. But it has just started. It's in front of Judge Robert Shelby. And really, we're at the motion to dismiss stage. So we're at that initial stage where then whatever decision is made by Judge Shelby is going to get appealed by either side, and the litigation will continue for a while. But it's very similar in its theory of the case to the Huntsman lawsuit.
Okay. Well, look, we've got over 100 people on here, and let me just get right down to the nitty gritty when it comes to this. Your opinion, Kolby? We getting money back?
It's a really hard question for me to answer. A lot of people ask me this since I covered those. Um, this is the way I put it before, and I think this is the best I can do to answer that question. Is I don't know, but I think the Huntsman case or the case called Chappelle, that's the other case that's in Utah right now, are probably the best chance that we've got.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
think they are about the cleanest shot that we'll get, but if I was a betting man, probably not. However, and I did say this on Mormon Stories, so I'm borrowing from myself, but it's important to remember that it's not always just about the money. Part of this is about revealing the church's behavior to the
Yeah.
way it treats its members and highlighting some of the frankly very ridiculous arguments they made in these appellate cases to highlight the way that they act. And that might be all we get out of this. But frankly, I think that has already revealed a lot and will continue to reveal a lot.
Okay. So I was doing a little search today, kind of prepping, and I was kind of confused or surprised by something that kept popping up. I thought that this was a misprint or something. I felt like $2.3 billion is kind of a lot of money for a lawsuit. And let me just say that when I typed in, like Mormon, lawsuits or whatever, LDS, I mean, my page just, it was full. It was full, but what's going on with 2-something billion? Is that, I mean, do you know much about that, or is this?
So I don't know a whole lot about this case. I remember looking at it when it first came out, and the wording of that is very important because my recollection is, and I'm kind of speaking from memory here, but my recollection is that the liability imputed, that 2.3 billion, very little of that was paid by the church, if anything. I remember looking at it and saying, I don't think implicating the church in this particular story was actually warranted. But I may
I
be
see.
thinking of a different story.
Okay.
It's possible.
Well, I clicked around on that link, and I feel like I saw that the church ended up paying $1 million, but again, I don't know. That's a quite different than 2-point-something billion. So anyway, no worries on that. Let me just get a couple questions or a conversation about the whole SEC settlement, because I don't
Sure.
just. So my understanding, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the church has had or has so much money that during, I think, Hinckley's time, they decided to basically take the money that was in Ensign Peak or wherever it was and spread it out to like 13 different companies.
So they actually formed Ensign Peak in 1997 under Hinckley's direction because the church was finally basically solvent. So for people who don't know kind of the financial history of the church, it was basically on the eve of on the verge of bankruptcy, both back in the 1800s during Joseph's time. It was constantly running from creditors, and then in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, I think I have that timeline right. I was born in the 80s, so this is before my time, but I think it was Henry Moyle who was basically brought in to like fix the church's solvency problems. But basically what happened is the church took, if I remember the numbers correctly, people could look at the SEC order for more details, but they took $7 billion of excess tithing money and parked it in Ensign Peak. And so anyways, I'll stop there. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. Perfect. So basically, in my view of looking at it, we had so much money in one account that the brethren or whoever said, let's spread it out so it's not creating any fuss or any reason for people to be looking at it. And so they spread it out. And so now you have a bunch of companies that have, quite a bit of money, but Just basically as a way to hide or make it appear that we're not as rich as we are. That, I mean, that's my understanding. And then I don't. I guess I can't put into words what we did wrong, but I know that there was a $4 million fine and then $1 million fine, one to Ensign Peak, one to the church.
Mhm.
Basically, we didn't account for those other companies in the way that they wanted. I mean, can you set me more clear on exactly what we did wrong?
Yeah, so I've done a few interviews on the SEC um, settlement. So I'm trying to think of the best way to start here. I think the best way to start is that people need to keep in mind why the Securities and Exchange Commission, that's what the SEC stands for, why the Securities and Exchange Commission exists. The Securities and Exchange Commission was created by Congress because of the Great Depression. So, for people who don't remember their history class, the Great Depression was caused because of financial decisions made by people on Wall Street and how they were making those investment decisions and basically the gamification of Wall Street. Okay. That's what caused so many people to lose everything in the Great Depression and basically caused, a decade or more of destitution throughout all of the United States. The SEC exists as a response to that. And so I'm highlighting that because one response I've seen from apologists like Jacob Hansen is that the SEC is just corrupt or that they had it in for the church. It's important to remember that regulatory agencies like the SEC, however you feel about the government, in theory, they exist to protect you. So one of the rules that the SEC has is that if you have a certain amount of assets, you have to report those to the SEC and to the public. And the idea is if you're if you're a big enough market force, you need to report that so that you can't do what led to the crash in 1929
Mm.
without people being able to be aware. One of those requirements, and there's a whole bunch of them, but one of those requirements is what's known as a 13F filing. I would point people again to the Widow's Mite has a great breakdown of this on one of their like little slideshows that break it down at a high level. Like I said, I know I've done interviews on this before where
Yeah.
I'm more refreshed on it, but it's important to also remember that the order that was entered was agreed upon by the church. So when people look at it, and look at the details, the church agreed to those terms. They agreed to the 4 million fine to Ensign Peak and the 1 million to the church. The reason the 1 million was imputed to the church is because senior church leaders signed off on every decision that was made that led to the creation of these 13 shell companies. The idea was if we create these shell companies and we keep their assets below that like mandatory reporting threshold, then we don't have to comply with that reporting threshold. That was
Mm.
the idea, right?
I see.
Now, I'll point out that in the SEC order, again, which the church agreed to, church audit flagged that issue twice for the church's legal team and for the internal people of the church to say we don't think that this is standard accounting because there are accounting standards that accountants have to meet, just like there are legal ethical standards that you have to meet. And so to me, that's one of the most significant facts in the SEC order is that the church's own audit department had brought to its attention, we don't think that the SEC is going to agree with the way that you've characterized these transactions and the way you're doing this. And it's going to be a problem. And guess what? It was a problem.
Mm.
Now, as far as the intent behind it, that's where I struggle to fully understand like where people's heads were at. The head of Ensign Peak, Roger Clark, Clark with an E, did tell the Washington, I think it was the Washington Post, when Ensign Peak was first discovered, that the reason that Ensign Peak existed was because they did want to basically obscure the church's investment portfolio to so that members never felt like they didn't need to pay tithing. Um, so I think most of what you said is really accurate, but the I'd point people to the actual order. It's pretty digestible. It's like 8 or 9 pages.
Okay.
And I'd also say that I know I covered it with Nemo
Yeah.
on an episode of Nemo's show, and I think I also covered it with Shalise Sola on Cults to Consciousness, but I'd have to refresh my memory. The only reason I'm being a little careful is because I try and be really, really precise with everything I say about the church, especially when I'm talking about the legal field. So I want to put an asterisk next to everything I said, tell people to go look at the order or listen to those interviews I did where I had just read it and had all the details
Absolutely.
off the
Yeah.
top of my head.
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfectly reasonable. Springing a lot of this stuff on you. Just to conclude this talk, this was the final statement that the church issued, that we affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret mistakes made, and now consider this matter closed. So why are we even talking about this? I mean, it's closed.
Yeah, they said it, so it must be true.
Well, Kolby, I'm not going to keep you more on this topic. I know you do lawyering all day long, so I want to shift gears just a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
I will be honest, I did not realize before last night that you had done this original Mormon Stories episode. It was 2 years ago, almost 3 now, because I think it was in January or February. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was preparing for today, and I said, like I said, I've seen you on many other shows recently, including Mormon Stories, but in a different capacity. And I just want to say, first of all, I noticed a couple things right off the bat. Number one, your wife is an absolute rock star. Mm-hmm. And I want everyone in the comments to tell me if you agree with that. But she outshined you, bro. I mean, she was awesome.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, she was awesome. So that was the first thing that stood out to me. But basically, as I went through that, what people will find if they watch that is a little bit about your own your own story and your wife, as far as Mormon story type thing, but not a ton. But it was revolving around a specific situation that happened in your ward, and you guys detail it just very appropriately, and I was just really impressed and amazed at your integrity, your your decision to just be honest, let the chips fall. So basically what I had done is I went through listening this morning, and I just, every time that you or someone said something that I was like, man, I love that, I stopped and went, and wrote it down. And so I thought maybe we could just talk about some of those things, if that's okay.
Yeah, before we do that, if I can just say one thing.
Of course.
I already kind of hinted at this, but my wife and I had been going to church like less than a month before we appeared on Mormon Stories. Like, we had been active for years. My last calling technically was whatever they call the young men's president now. But I had been the gospel doctrine teacher in our ward for 4 years before that. I'd gone through the entire standard works. And part of the reason we did Mormon Stories is because we still really believed that the church would right the ship or correct course if we just brought this issue to more attention. Basically, our interview dealt with how the church deals with abuse, and specifically how it deals with abuse from a sitting bishop, and how disappointed we were. I think part of the problem there was that I'm not a prosecutor anymore, but I was a former criminal prosecutor, and so I understood a little bit too much about the criminal procedure process to listen to any lies about how it works. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to it. That's a whole lot of Kolby for one day. I'll just say too much for me, even.
Well, I enjoyed it. And so I'm just going to go through here. If there's anything that you feel like adding to some thoughts to, otherwise we can just click right through. But this first one actually came out last night with Julie. I noticed that she said the same thing. And this was the first time I had heard this, and I think it's actually quite brilliant. We always hear in the church this kind of catchphrase, if there's anything you don't understand, just say, well, it'll all be worked out in heaven, right?
Hmm.
And we get that with polygamy or, just anything that we have a problem with. And so you guys were discussing, specifically during this interview, you were discussing some things around LGBT issues and things, and the church takes one stance, but you guys brought it out like, why can't that same answer be applied in some of these circumstances? Okay, fine. If we get to heaven and God doesn't want something, let him work it out then. And I
Hmm.
just, I think Julie said something similar last night, and I'm like, that makes so much sense. And anything that's just a common sense answer, I love. Uh,
Yeah. Can I use that as a jumping off point to say something
of
too?
course, yeah.
Is one of the reasons I looked at things like that way is when Christ was asked what the greatest commandment is, he answered and said to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And for people who are even like cursorily familiar with the legal field, that laws can't trump the Constitution, right? Laws have to be in compliance with the Constitution. So to me, and I know this is kind of a roundabout way of saying this, but the Constitution of Christianity is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So when I would hear things from church leaders that I felt like were inconsistent with that direction, that's where I would fall back on exactly the same idea that Julie is like, no, in any doubt, I'm going to err on the side of believing that people are doing the best that they can and that we should put love of other people first. I don't see there's this notion now in the church that Oakes and Bednar have really championed that the first and second great commandment can be in tension with each other. I don't see it that way at all. And I don't even think that's a way that Mormons should see it because King Benjamin literally says that when you are in the service of your fellow beings, you're also in the service of your God. So I don't understand how you could even get to the place where showing love to someone can go in the direction of too much, with one exception, which is we shouldn't enable people in destructive behaviors, but like grown consenting adults who are of the same gender loving each other and having a relationship together is not that. And that's one of the reasons that I just can't stomach this wave of anti-LGBT sentiment in the church that really started with not started with, but has been brought to a head again with Holland's Musket Talk and follow-on talks that have had the same idea.
Thanks for that. Lots of awesome comments. Everybody agreeing there. So the next one that I loved, you guys kind of brought out this whole point in Mormonism. It seems like the default is just to blame God. And I hit on this a little bit recently with I did an episode that's called "It's Not That Easy, Dad." And basically, the idea was, my dad had told me, hey, after we've had a bunch of fights and everything, he says, look, I don't care what church you go to. I hope you'll always, have your same testimony of God and Christ and all this.
Hmm.
And my answer was, well, Dad, it's not that easy. And then so I went on through the episode explaining. And one of the reasons that I tried to point out was that I had been conditioned or taught in Mormonism to blame God. Why
Hmm.
didn't the blacks have the priesthood? And you pointed out, hey, it's not just the priesthood; it's temple blessings.
Yeah.
Oh, it's God's fault. Right? He's the racist. Why don't women have the priesthood? It's like we always just blame God. And
Hmm.
I love the way that you brought that out. Any thoughts on that? More than what I had said there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mormons do that constantly. When there are things where there are things that can't be explained, but church leaders or apologists want to insist, no, it has to be this way. That's the excuse they always use is, well, God's a God of mysteries and we don't know, and his unscrutable ways. Like any con man can use the same excuse to justify controlling you and your life today. And maybe I'm just revealing what I think of those tactics because that's the way I see it. And it was actually, even though I don't identify with believing in a God anymore, it was actually my belief in the inherent goodness of God and believing in the God I was taught to believe in that I just couldn't see it in the church anymore.
Mm. So the last Goonie says that your episode was the only one my mom has ever watched. She didn't make it to part two. I'm not sure if that's because she had heard all she needed to hear or what, but it was a fantastic episode. So you guys, this is something I've heard quite a bit from various people, and you guys also pointed out how the church is always behind the world and dealing with issues.
Hmm.
And I think John says a lot that we're 20 to 30 years behind because our leaders are all, 70, 80, and 90 and 100, and it's like
Hmm.
they're thinking about back when they were bishops and stake presidents and things. And so you guys had some thoughts around that. Don't know if there's anything else really much more to add to that.
The only thing I would add to that is there's no better example of that principle than reading or listening to the series that John's done with Dr. Matt Harris, then Second Class Saints.
Oh,
It
that's so
shows
good. Yeah.
it shows how human the process of the church is. So if people want to like sort through and find the divine in that, good luck to them. But if you were willing to make excuses for that, you could make excuses for any faith system. And this is where I just come back to something that's been central in my deconstruction and what I try and model in myself as much as I can is I'm not willing to give the church any breaks that I wouldn't be willing to give any other institution. And so any excuses like that that apologists trot out that they'll only make for the Mormon church, I'm not willing to do it.
Mm. I have to point out this comment here. My African American mission companion believed he'll be made white in the resurrection. I'm so disgusted and embarrassed by that teaching, and sad to read that.
Hmm.
All right, Kolby. Something else you had brought out in that episode was you mentioned how the apologists start with the conclusion and work backwards. I'm no expert, but that doesn't sound like proper, the proper way that you actually find truth or find, that you test a theory or anything. You don't start at the end and work backwards. Do you recall what you meant by that or any other thoughts on that now?
I think I was talking about how studying apologetics and really bad apologetics was something that like sealed the deal for me, and seeing that there were no good answers to some of the questions that I was dealing with. I laugh a little bit when you brought that quote up because I spend most of my time when I'm engaged in Mormon talk now countering really bad apologetics. That's what it feels like. And so I was laughing and just saying like, yeah, that's weirdly prescient that apologetics and bad apologetics in particular bothered me even back then. And now, here we are 3 years later, and, RFM and I have recorded 20 hours of content dealing with one apologist's stupid arguments.
All right. So the next one I really loved was you just said it's our own integrity that is leading us out. And I just point out with even with the wording of that, and you kind of talked about this earlier, you guys were still like this interview was very early on in this whole process for you. And even the way you worded that, like it's our integrity that is leading us out. And
Mhm.
that is something I continue to say. I recognize that people can stay and choose to stay, and I'm fine with them staying, especially when they like they the church is something different for them. It's a fun place to be, and it's a country club, and it's a whatever
Sure.
analogy you want to use. But for me, it was just this whole idea around integrity. If it's true, it's true. I've taught thousands of people on my mission or as bishop or on the high council, and to find out that I was, misleading people, it's just I can't do that. So I identified with what you had said there regarding integrity.
Yeah, and I don't have any follow-up thought to that except just to say kind of a coda to that story. And we just haven't been able to arrange to get down to Utah and actually film something with John. But I do, and John wants to too. We want to do a follow-up interview where we talk about basically like the rest of the story until we left the church, because there's some good things that I have to say to praise certain church leaders that in the first telling of the saga were kind of like problems that became a lot better. So I'll give you an example. Our stake president, after our episode released, I was really worried, especially because like I live in the same community that I grew up in. Like my profession is here. I work in the public sector. Like I have a job that could be affected by having been critical of the church. That's a reality. I've had people who tried to get me fired because of the things I do on the internet relating to the faith. And I had one individual last year write a 17-page letter to my previous employer, called my previous employer multiple times trying to get me fired. Luckily, they understood exactly who I was because I don't have anything to be ashamed of. And I was very open with them about what I do and why I do it, and exactly what you said, that it was about integrity. Anyways, to come back to that, our stake president, after Mormon Stories, I was really afraid that he was just going to call me a liar or he was going to say bad things about us. He handled the situation before Mormon Stories terribly. He even admitted that. He handled the situation after Mormon Stories about as well as a stake president can. He came and brought the area president to our home, met with us multiple times. We developed, in conjunction with the area president and the stake president, protocols to improve youth protection training in our stake.
Wow.
And where we started hitting a wall was we wanted to continue working with Salt Lake to improve youth protection throughout the church. And that's where we basically received a blow-off letter from Salt Lake telling us to stop bothering them. I've shared the letter publicly, so I just don't remember exactly what it said off the top of my head, but it basically blew us off. That letter came to our house on a Saturday. The next Monday is when the story with Mike Resendez broke, featuring the sex abuse case in Bisbee, Arizona. And that's where I just decided, like, the church has the system is set up the way they want it, and they could change it if they want to, and they have no interest in changing it. They're fine with the way it is, whether they want it to be that way or it's just an acceptable, cost of doing business. I hate that phrase, but if that's the way they look at it, they have no interest in changing. And so it was, again, coming back to that quote you pulled, it was integrity that made me say, I cannot associate or have my name associated with an institution that does the types of things I've seen this church do. And on that Arizona Bisbee case, I read every single page of the primary source documents on that case, every single bit of it, thousands of pages, or maybe it was hundreds of pages, but it was a lot. And I read all of it because I wanted to make sure I understood the situation completely. And with my legal training, I could understand it more than other people could, and countered a lot of bad apologetics on that as well. But my point is just, it's funny to see that quote because that is how I feel. I feel like I left over integrity because I couldn't associate with this organization anymore, as much as I love the people. And that sounds weird because I have a lot of criticisms for the church and I say some pretty harsh things about the church sometimes. But the truth is, I still have friends in my life, previous coworkers or friends from high school or whatever, who are still members, who know the issues, who don't try and excuse them, who aren't fundamentalist idiots like Jacob Hansen. And they have all my support in the world, who are trying to make the church a better place. They have all my support in the world. But no, for me, it's not an institution that I can bring. And the prime reason is my children, because I'm not claiming that I have all the answers on how to live a good life, but I am not giving the problems of the church to my children. I'm not going to pass that cost onto them when I know these issues. That's really what it was for me.
Hell yeah. I love it. All right, let me keep going here. So at this point, your wife was talking about how it's scary being in the position that you were in, where you guys were starting to see, kind of like the last quote, like, it's our integrity leading us out. And then you kind of took over and you said, yeah, it is scary, but it's also very freeing. And then you said, I don't have to do mental gymnastics anymore. And man, when you said that, I was like, yes, that's how I feel. I had wrote something that I called "The Truth Has Set Me Free."
Mm-hmm.
And it was this same idea that now I'm free. I'm not boxed in and kind of like having to defend things that there are no answer for, and having to
Mhm.
use stuff like, oh, we'll make it up in heaven, it'll all be worked out. And it's just all these ridiculous arguments. Now I'm free. Whatever I'm interested in, wherever I find, my mind going, I have the permission to do that and to learn. And so I appreciated that, and I feel the same way. Any thoughts about the freeing feeling that you mentioned that you were starting to get?
Yeah, having done the series with RFM on Book of Mormon apologetics, especially the Light Truth Letter series we talked about, when I look at some of these excuses that some of these clever apologists have come up with, like the catalyst theory for the Book of Mormon, right? They're starting to do the same type of thing with the with the Book of Abraham. I mean, they're starting to do the same type of thing with the Book of Mormon, right? It's a revelation and wasn't a translation. Those excuses are ad hoc. They're generated in response to the previous claim being disproven. And the thing that's so great about it, to borrow a phrase that Bill and RFM have used a number of times, they are the evidence that they present are exactly equivalent to what you would expect from a knowing fraud. And that's where the mental gymnastics to me is triggered. It's trying to explain why things that seem a certain way and are obviously a certain way aren't a certain way. So an example I think of is like, my grandmother, my grandpa passed when I was really young, and it was really traumatic for my mom. It was really traumatic for my grandmother. Um, and the church has this weird sexism over ceilings and canceling ceilings and resealings. And I remember just engaging in these weird mental gymnastics on that topic. Like, well, no, let me explain to you why it's not sexist and it actually makes a lot of sense. Like, no, it doesn't make any sense. This is where members of the church and apologists, especially, just ignore Occam's razor or the law of parsimony, which is that the answer with the least amount of conjecture and assumptions is most often the correct one. And when it isn't, it can typically be demonstrated. That's, I guess, what that brings to mind for me is I think of those types of examples. And yeah, I just feel that so much. And I felt it then. I feel it even so much more now to just be
Yeah.
like, my life is so much easier. The other thing it reminds me of, and maybe you experienced this, I think, because I listened to your Mormon stories. I haven't listened to everything you've done on this channel, but I have listened to a lot. And one of the things I feel like you and I had in common, you talked about your time as a bishop and how it put you in the hospital. And one of the things that I felt, and I was never a bishop. Like I said, the highest calling I had was um, the ward Sunday school. But one of the things that I felt is you're taught in the church from a very early age that the Spirit speaks to you through your feelings. And you have to listen to those feelings because those promptings, if you miss them, especially as a priesthood holder, right? If you miss them, you can jeopardize someone's health or their safety or even their salvation. And what I've noticed in my time, especially now with more distance from walking away from the church, is I was constantly scrutinizing my feelings and the way that I felt in a way that was really, really unhealthy. And it was because I thought that I was receiving promptings and listening to the Spirit. In reality, I was probably just giving myself general anxiety disorder, thinking about how I was feeling 24/7 and like rehashing rehashing discussions I'd have with friends. And I'd be that guy that would be like, hey, the other day you said something and I said this, and it was because I would dwell on feelings all the time. So that freeing feeling, I feel it with the mental gymnastics, and I also just feel it without this need to involve this supernatural element in my life anymore.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh, I couldn't say it any better. I did. You brought in this whole feeling thing later on. You had said it. You said the idea that we can judge the truthfulness of something by the way we feel about it needs to die. You just described way better than I could that whole period from starting to find some of these things out and then running through all of these scenarios in my head. And matter of fact, I've never told anyone this part, but there was like a week that I was totally flip flopping. Like I'm just gonna
Hmm.
stay in and try to make a change, on the inside. And I texted the whole stake presidency because they're my friends. And I said, this is what I said. I'm embarrassed to even admit it. I said, because I felt like I received an answer, like a feeling the night before when I was like, I'm going to stay in church. I texted them all and I said, you guys praying for me right now? And one of them said, well, you've been on my mind. And I said, okay, because I felt like, I've received an answer to that. I just need to stay in church. And, and then the next, it's just constantly like, how do I feel? Do I have chill bumps? Do I have goosebumps? And that was driving me friggin' crazy, man. It was driving me crazy. I've talked a lot about this on my channel, but yeah, it ended up, I had my wife take me to the emergency room. I was like, I'm losing my mind. And matter of fact, I'll go out. She's like, what are you doing? I'm cleaning my truck out because I felt like I was gonna die. Felt like I was gonna have a heart attack. And I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I'm a healthy guy. I'm an outdoors guy. I'm a construction worker. I was like, I don't know what the frick's going on. My mind's going crazy. My heart's racing. And I was constantly trying to see how do I feel? And is this the spirit or am I being deceived? And yeah, I haven't had that kind of bullshit feeling since then. And you described that really great. So a couple other ones. This was pretty cool. John had said, why can't the church take the same approach with people leaving that Hinckley did with people joining the church when he said, bring what good you have and let's see if we can add to it. That's not what, if you decide to leave, it's not like, well, we appreciate you guys. We're glad you were with us. Hope you take the good that we gave you and hope, add to it somewhere. No, that's not what we do. We shun, we shame, and I just thought that was a really cool thing that John had pointed out there.
Totally. The worst part about that is, so we still live in the same house, like where all of this stuff happened. We still live kitty corner across from the bishop that was like such a jerk to us when we were leaving and made our son's baptism like a really unpleasant experience for us. And again, at the time that happened, we were full believers, right? And I'll bump into people from the ward from time to time at like Walmart or whatever, and I'll get it's this fake pity that just, honestly, man, there are times I just want to, I can't say the things I want to say on a live stream, but it's like this fake pity and people putting their hand on my arm. How are you? Like, we're in the same house. If you really cared, and I haven't changed my number since high school. So if you really cared, you could find us anytime you wanted.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that's so hard about it, man, is like when you leave, it is, you're castigated, you're cast aside. I've never really talked about this online because I think it's a little gauche to share this, but something that was very meaningful to me is 2022. I mean, was a really hard year for us because we did Mormon stories. We had fallout with my wife's family, who are still, for the most part, believers. Anytime you're going through that deconstruction, it's really hard. Later that year, I was nominated and selected to win the Idaho State Bar's Outstanding Young Lawyer of 2022. And I can't tell you how much winning that award, and even more than the award, even more than the plaque, even more than getting to go to a ceremony, it was the letters written by, it was the letters written by students that I'd taught, by the justice that I'd worked for on the Idaho Supreme Court, by friends, by mentors, by colleagues, even people I'd litigated cases against, that at that time in my life, when I felt like my Mormon community had completely thrown me aside and made me expendable, my legal community was there for me. And that just meant the world to me, obviously.
Man, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. You reminded me of a time right after I was bishop. Our house burnt down. My wife. It was 3 days before Christmas. My wife and I were hiking and in the mountains and out of cell service. And as soon as we come back into cell service, our house burnt down. It was gone. The kids kids running from it and everything. Anyways, the very community, the largely the Baptist community where we live, our church is very, very sparse. You would not have believed the love and the outpouring from the people that I had become quite judgmental about. Because they didn't have the truth and they didn't have the priesthood and they were just playing church and all the stuff. And I felt that's a very similar way that you just described of how and the church also, our church did great things, but our whole family was just really impressed by the love of people who were not from our church, and it was impressive. So
Yeah, and the thing that's just really frustrates me is people talk all the time, like when you leave the church and say, like, but what are you going to do for community? And I just want to say this definitively. The church's community is fake in the sense that, like, yes, there are people there. There are your assigned friends or whatever they call home teachers nowadays, right? But like the second you don't fall in line with that system, you're rejected. You're completely rejected and thrown aside. The second, so even though I will say, and he deserves it, and I praised our stake president, the second I told him that we were done and we were removing our records, never talk to me again. And I didn't send him an angry text or anything. I never said, and don't ever talk to us again. You're disgusting. Like, it was a very cordial relationship. He tripped over himself multiple times telling us how much he loved our family. It's been, what, over 2 years? Haven't heard one thing from him ever since. And so to me, that Mormon community, it's like, it's not even there. It's a Potemkin town. It doesn't exist. It looks like it exists, but it's not real. It's so flimsy. It falls over. It's like a cardboard cutout. It falls over the second you actually like need anything from it. At least that was my experience.
Yeah. Love that, man. Let me mention, this is the first time I've seen, I don't know if he's still there or not. I've seen Dan in the chat. Dan, I love you, man. I cannot thank you enough for all that you have done and continue to do in this space. You are an absolute legend. Thanks so much for chiming in there. Got a few more here, Kolby. We kind of just talked about this one, but this was something you brought out in that episode. The church isn't the only place with good people. And, that is kind of a common thing. It's like, yeah, but the church has great people, and they do. I could tell you 10 people right now that I feel like are top-notch people. But I can also tell you another 10 who I've always thought were, but have recently showed me that it was conditional, and sort of like you just talked about.
Yeah, and I don't have anything more than what I can just say there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let me see what else I had. Oh, this was interesting. Thanks, Dan. Absolutely. Let's see. Okay, so this one was interesting. I have not heard of this talk, but I did just a little search after you guys mentioned it. And you had pointed out, I don't know if it was you or your wife, I think it was you, but pointed out of this talk from Wendy Nelson, and she says, we should put a exclamation mark after anything the prophet says and a question mark from anyone else. And I just thinking about how problematic and how that attitude leads you to, for me, the emergency room twice, know?
Is there any better example of what Wendy Nelson said there than putting your trust in the arm of the flesh? Like, the church's apologetic now is these guys are just men that make mistakes, right? That's the way that they get away with excusing a century plus of systemic racism. Why in the world would anyone do that? That's just, to me, that's just absurd. When you know the history of this church and how behind it's been and all the problems, why in the world would you put exclamation marks behind what they said?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with Peter. Go find you a hot rod club that's full of great people who don't give a shit what you believe in. Yeah. All right. So this next one, you were talking about, you were about to go into a Temple Recommend, I believe, interview, and I think you were kind of just saying, I don't know about this question about supporting local leaders anymore. I've been on the other side of the desk and asking that question in the temple rec. Do you support the local authorities and general authorities of the church or whatever? And I never had anyone say no, but I don't think I could. I definitely couldn't say that I do anymore. I don't know. Any thoughts on what you were going through or how you feel now about that?
Well, I guess I'll just say this. To me, and this is something that Jim and Julie Hanks talked about last night with Coach. To me, support and sustain did not mean unquestioningly agree. It never did. I always viewed the church as a place where if you do it respectfully, you can respectfully disagree, even with a prophet. Um, I don't think that's the reality of the church, especially now. But that's where my head was at. I viewed support and sustain, that part of my duty to support and sustain was to share my professional expertise with the stake president, with the replacement bishop, and tell them where I thought they were wrong. And I didn't do it in public until I didn't have any avenue than to do it in public because they wouldn't listen.
Yeah. All right, I've just got a couple more here. I really love this. You had said something like members need to take ownership of their church. I'm trying to remember the exact context, but I think it was this whole idea, kind of like we've been talking about, that, quit putting an exclamation mark on what some other person has said. And do you remember what kind of you were
I do.
feeling about taking ownership?
I do actually. I was talking about the church's abhorrent child sex abuse policies. And I was saying that if members don't understand the reality of how it works, that they need to get acquainted with the reality of how it works in practice. And they need to demand better from church leaders. And that's something I still feel 100%. If the church is, as I believe it is, and even nuanced members believe it is, a human institution that has some sliver of the divine in it wherever you find it, that doesn't mean that you can't ask for better, that you can't say, I want better. I actually think it's a huge red flag that members of the church never do. Like, look at what we talked about a few minutes ago about the SEC order. That issue was brought to the attention of senior church leaders by the church's own auditing department, and they didn't do anything about it. And the members don't do anything about that. There's a complete lack of accountability. There's this idea in like philosophy known as ethical fading, which is the idea that if we've got 100 people going along with something that's terrible that you wouldn't do on your own, sometimes there are certain people who will do that. I think I was raised without that bone for some reason. Even in my mission, there were times that my mission friends would joke about me being that guy, the guy who would say the thing that everybody else was thinking, but didn't have the guts to say. To me, that's what support and sustain meant. And that's what I mean when I say that members need to demand better of this church. And I would still tell members today that they need to do that. Coach is joking and saying, but that's public advocacy, Kolby. And it's like, that's damn right. And that's the only way the church has ever been proven to change. And even people like Jacob, who decry other people's public advocacy, are complete hypocrites because they do the exact same thing when they see someone wearing a pride pin. What's more threatening, a pride pin or the way that the church handles child sex abuse policies? Jacob, I know the true answer to that question, and so do you. Sorry, I'm heated.
Love it, love it, love it, man. All right, so I had one more just quote from that interview. You had said, to save the image of the church, you often denigrate the image of God. We sort of talked about this in the blame God portion, but anything else that comes to mind with that?
Yeah, I think there's no better example than taking the Lord. I've heard this from other people before. I think there's no better example of taking the Lord's name in vain, if that's something that's important to you, than saying God required you to do something that makes you look like an asshole. And that's what the church does all the time. That's what apologists do all the time. And I'm just not willing to do it anymore.
Yeah. Awesome. Look, we've got 170 people on. Kolby, I've never had that many on a live So I know so many of you are here for Kolby, and I also am here for Kolby. You've been awesome today. I want to go ahead and ask everyone to like and subscribe and help me grow my channel. If there are questions that y'all have, are you okay with taking a few if there's other
Sure.
questions in the chat?
Yeah.
While people get some questions together, and I know we could probably spend a full episode on each one of these, but I was gonna. So one of the kind of, I guess, shelf items that I had in my decision to quit going to church was Book of Mormon historicity issues, and
Hmm.
just to me, it was obviously a you know a Joseph Smith product.
Hmm.
And so I had asked you if you would just give me a few ideas, and you don't have to spend, we can spend, 5 minutes on it, or however long you want it. But just, I had said, would you give me roughly, 4 or 5 of kind of the things that really convince you that the Book of Mormon is not what, we want to claim. It's not a historical, book, and that, if your stance is that Joseph wrote it, which is my stance, what convinces you of that? And when you get finished, if there are any other questions, we'll see if we can get to them. But we are getting close. I told Kolby I wouldn't go much past an hour and a half. So will you respond to those Book of Mormon things? Just a few
Yeah,
ideas.
I will. So the first I would point to is that example I gave earlier, which is that the Book of Mormon, specifically in Mormon 9, makes claims about Hebrew's information density relative to Egyptian. Those claims are false, and the false claims demonstrate the same misunderstanding of the way Egyptian worked that Joseph Smith has later in his life. To me, that is an absolute sinker for Book of Mormon historicity. The second is there are stories that, in the context of what the Book of Mormon purports to be, which is it was a record that was kept and then abridged by Mormon and Moroni at certain parts. There are parts of the story that make no sense. And what I mean is this: Abinadi, which is recorded in Mosiah, mid Mosiah, there are words that Abinadi says after the departure of Alma the senior, right? So people remember probably the picture, I think it's Freiburg, where Abinadi is like freaking jacked and he's like an old man and he's sitting,
Chained up.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's in chains, and King Noah's there with like a Jaguar because apparently Mesoamerican model won out in that debate. But what Abinadi says after Alma leaves is in the Book of Mormon. How does that make any sense? Alma was the one who was keeping the records. Everyone else there was wicked, except for Abinadi, who was burned. How do we have a recording of what Abinadi said?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense when you take the story at face value and say, okay, I'm going to go with this. It doesn't make any sense.
So it had to have been coming from a different perspective.
Exactly.
Which
it can't be what it purports to be.
Which is similar to the whole when Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, and everyone's asleep and he's by himself, but we still get his words. I mean, it's kind of the same idea as that, or am I wrong in that?
Say that one more time.
So when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's praying, he's alone, we're told, because the apostles were asleep. But yet we still get the words that he said. And I know a lot of people have, but it's a similar idea that who recorded that?
Yeah, exactly. If this is a human record and it has the imperfections of humans, which the Book of Mormon apologizes for like a dozen times, how did we get those words? Where did they come from?
Right.
Because this is an important point, because the Book of Mormon knows how to record someone receiving actual revelation. So when the plates of ether are translated using the Urim and Thummim, right, that is a revelatory experience, and the Book of Mormon can record that. So presumably, if Mormon or Moroni, whoever's abridging the record at that point, received Abinadi's words as a revelation, he would have done an aside or like an editorial note where he does it repeatedly throughout the text to say, and hey, by the way, it's Mormon here, and here's something that I received. This is what Abinadi said, and it was awesome because he owned King Noah. So that's
okay.
one example.
I follow you.
Another example is I think it's in Moroni. I would have to look. There's the Book of Mormon has this diatribe against infant baptism, right? And this is very similar to my Abinadi example. Um, the Book of Mormon has this diatribe against infant baptism. At the time that that diatribe is made, it's made from Mormon in a letter to Moroni, right? They are the only two people who are good at that point. The Nephites have been completely wicked. They make a point of saying that. The Lamanites are wicked. So, how did that topic? Because what we're taught in response to apologetics on race and the priesthood issues is that, well, prophets have to deal with the contemporary issues and they can't receive revelation just in a vacuum. They need to ask questions. That's how the Lord gives us answers, right? We even hear that about Joseph Smith. How did the topic of infant baptism come up at a time when there were only two righteous people? That doesn't make any sense. There would have been no baptism at that point. It literally doesn't make any sense that it came up. What it does match is if Joseph Smith is dictating this book, as I believe he was. I think the best take I've ever heard on how the Book of Mormon was created is from William Davis and his book Visions in a Seer Stone, which I'll admit I haven't read the full book yet. I've read parts of it, but I've listened to many interviews with Bill, and I think he's really nailed where the Book of Mormon came from.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. Thanks for that.
So that's one example. And my next, this is a more general one than like a specific story, is the Book of Mormon bears repeated signs of oral dictation. And this is something that is illustrated in Bill's work. So I would point people to that. But there are tons of times where the Book of Mormon says something and then contradicts itself or corrects itself. So they buried their weapons of war,
or weapons of peace.
Their weapons of peace, or they buried their weapons of war for peace.
Yeah.
That makes, if you think about what the Book of Mormon purports to be, which is Mormon or Moroni looking at these records, these pre-existing records, and then recording it painstakingly on metal engraved plates, it makes absolutely no sense that he would make a mistake like that. But when do we make mistakes like that all of the time? When we're doing oral presentations and we're talking off the top of our head, even if we have a loose outline. That's another huge example to me that the Book of Mormon is not an actual historical record. It's an orally dictated performance is really the term that I picked up from Bill Davis. Okay. The last one that I would highlight, well, let's do a question maybe if there are any.
All right. I was going to do these as just kind of spitfire. You can give, there was a few. So one person said, will Nelson make it to conference in April? Place your bets.
Who knows? He's got the life cycle of a Palpatine, it seems.
This person was saying, who was your favorite apostle as a believer? Is that something you want to answer?
Yeah, I always thought, even as a believer, I'm not kidding, I always thought that David Bednar was a dick. So my favorite was, believe it or not, was probably Holland. I really liked some of Elder Holland's talks. I still think about that talk that he gave in, I think it's 2009, Safety for the Soul, where he talked about the Book of Mormon. That was
under the Book of Mormon.
Under through the Book of Mormon or whatever he says.
Yeah.
I remember how powerful that hit me at the time. Then I come to find out, like, he's holding up the book and says, this is the very book with the page still turned down. And it wasn't.
Yeah. I played that for my ward, Fifth Sunday, everyone together. And I would oftentimes bring in some Elder Holland. So I hear you on that. Let me mention the Church of Korihor says, ye say that this is a guilty and a fallen people because of the transgression of a parent. Behold, I say that a child is not guilty because of its parents. The word of Korihor. Okay. Appreciate the $10 there. Let me see if there's any other questions. Oh, here we go. From Colch. My question for Kolby. Who is your favorite ex-Mormon? And
I will admit that I'm always a little threatened by how funny my wife thinks Colch is.
Yeah, I also think so. I'm threatened by that baby face he's got. Like I don't really want my wife watching Colch all that much. You know what I'm saying? But I don't see any other questions there. Did you want to get? Did you have one other point that you wanted to get to, or did you pretty much?
Yeah, well, this is a more general one, and it's something that we kind of hit on in the Light and Truth Letter series. But as I did more research on what ancient Americans looked like what their civilization looked like, the people like the Hopewell, there is just no like reflection of that in the Book of Mormon. And so I guess I'm kind of going like external to the Book of Mormon to say this, but this is also something that Michael Coe in his interview with John really hits. He was an expert on Mesoamerica, and he really hits that it's the things that should be in the Book of Mormon, if it were what it purported to be, that aren't there, that are the biggest problem. So that's kind of like a general one. One that I mentioned on Mormon Stories that I always think is kind of funny is like, imagine you're Nephi, right? And you spend all this time building a boat, and you get over there, and you're from Arabia. So you've never seen a large predator like a bear or a wolf. I don't think they have any analog in that area. Imagine not mentioning that in your record, because First Nephi is not abridged. It's what Nephi wrote, supposedly, right? That's Joseph's solution to the lost 115 or 16 pages.
Right.
My point is, like, imagine what a bear would be to you if you have no idea what a bear is and you've never seen one before. It's like a 2-man-sized beast covered in fur that eats people, and you don't mention it, right? Like, that to me is so absurd. Think about taking this record at face value as what it claims to be. Can I answer Colch's question? And maybe it'll be a clever dodge because he's no longer an ex-Mormon podcaster. But I really, really, really loved John Larson. I loved John Larson's power and the way he threw down, pulled no punches on certain things. I just really loved his approach. I miss him from the podcasting space, and his, speaking of historical stuff, his How to Build a Transoceanic Vessel episode is one of the funniest and enlightening parts about taking this story of the Book of Mormon text at face value.
Sweet. I will check that out. I have only barely scratched the surface with him. As I said earlier, I'm sort of new to all this stuff, and it's quite overwhelming. You know, there's so much, but the little bit I have heard from him, I also have loved it. Dan says, it's always interesting listening to Kolby. I don't think he's a rando anymore. Oh my gosh. So we're over an hour and a half, and I've had the time of my life. I appreciate everyone, 181 people on. So thanks, Deanne. Appreciate that. If there are any other quick other questions, we can probably take those real quick. Who is your favorite?
Yeah, here's one. Who's your favorite atheist church spiritual leader? So that's Exmo Joe, who's hinting at the answer being himself. But much like I did for Colch, I'm actually going to give a different answer. No offense, Exmo Joe. I will say a huge part of my deconstruction, this is after I've deconstructed Mormonism, I love Christopher Hitchens. There are people who say, like, Christopher Hitchens and the new atheist movement is dead. I don't understand why they're saying that. Probably because Hitchens is, actually passed and can't counter it. But man, Hitchens in some of his debates, his debate with William Lane Craig, his repeated debates with Dinesh D'Souza, I must have listened to his debate with William Lane Craig like 5 or 6 times, and it's like 3 hours, man. And the reason I did it is because, after you leave Mormonism, and I'm sure you got this too, especially in the community you live in, there are people who are like, oh, I'm so excited now that you can find the true Jesus. And so they told me that William Lane Craig is one of supposedly the best apologists they have. And I listened to that episode and really gave it the honest try. But, and there were some things Hitch said that I disagreed with, but man, his turns of phrase, his wit, his humor, the way he threw down on things again, just, there are so many things that I'm just like, think of Hitchens all the time. We almost named we got a dog last year, our first dog ever for our family. And we almost named him Hitch, but we ended up naming him, because he was part Beagle and our kid is obsessed with science, we ended up naming him Darwin for those people who don't know, it's because Darwin's ship was the HMS Beagle, where he wrote the On the Origin of Species.
Okay. Real quick, someone wants to know when was it that you'll be back with RFM?
So I've got good news on that. We're going to do an episode on Saturday called How Apologists Lie to You. It's not a direct response to the Light and Truth letter, but I promise you, Austin Fife will feature in that. And when I say How Apologists Lie to You, we are not being flip. RFM and I are both attorneys. We're not the type to accuse people of lying unless we can bring the receipts. And you mentioned that earlier about Mormon stories, Nathan. Anytime I'm going to say something like that, I bring the receipts. We are going to prove that Austin Fife is a liar. We're going to prove that Jacob Hansen is a liar. We're going to prove that Cardinal Ellis is a liar. There you go. So we will do that on Saturday, and then we will go back to Light and Truth letter episode responses pretty soon after that. Actually, we've had a number of people with their own expertise. For example, a med student. I don't know if he wants to be named publicly yet, so I won't give his name. We had a med student reach out to us about Austin Fife's letter on the LGBT issues in the church, and this med student basically told us there's a lot of problems with this and we want to talk about it. So we're actually going to bring some more people on. There's a comment here that says these clouds focus on everything except for Christ. Okay, sure.
So you also will be on with Colch next week, I understand?
I am going to be on with Colch next week, and we're going to talk about DebateGate, which we talked about a little bit on this, but we're going to bring the receipts and watch all the videos to prove that Jacob Hansen is ridiculous.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. Again, great turnout tonight. Kolby, I have one request for you, and that is, can we do this again sometime in the not too distant future? I've loved getting to know you. I respect you. I count you as a friend, as a man of great integrity. And
thank you, Nathan. I think the same thing about you. And isn't it wonderful that after we leave the church, we find the community that we thought the church was all along? That's how I feel. So I'm glad that you're in this space, and I look forward to future episodes. I already said, Coach, I'll be on your show next week on Thursday.
Calm down. All right. Well, I'm going to hit play on my theme music, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again, Kolby.
It's been a while since I've been interviewed by Bishop.